Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Freeing Your Mind podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Dukeman, and this week I have with me Josh Nilson from Dark Horse Tactical. Josh, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Doing good. So let's just jump right in, Josh. Tell everybody about yourself. Tell us about your background, your story, and
Okay.
what
Yeah.
got you to where
So,
you are now.
again, my name is Josh Nilson. I'm actually originally from the Salt Lake area. I grew up just outside Salt Lake. Around 2007, moved down to the Las Vegas area to take a job for a major police department down there. I did 15 years with that police department. Did a variety of different things, everything from patrolling the mean streets to uh, field training new officers in the training program. And then I was on the SWAT team for 8 years. And then we're coming up on almost a year and a half now. I left in 2021, September 2021, to go full in on my business that I started in 2015 called Dark Horse Tactical. And basically, what we are is primarily we started off as a training company. So at the time, I was still active duty law enforcement, so there was only so much we could actually do while maintaining our status. So, uh, sorry, my computer is being weird. All right, so was doing that. Started that company in 2015. Felt like I had gained enough knowledge experience. It was all primarily firearms based, teaching other law enforcement, teaching civilians and firearms tactics, that kind of stuff,
Mm.
um, based on my experiences in law enforcement and previously. So, started that in 2015. In 2017, kind of based on some things that were going on in the department, I actually got into manufacturing. So I actually manufacture AR-15, AR-10 style rifles, and that's kind of between those two things we just started kind of chugging forward. And then in 2021, after a multitude of different occurrences and things going on at the PD and in our society as a whole, I decided to pull the plug on law enforcement and go into the business full time. So been doing that since September of 2021. We went and bought a brick and mortar shop close to the house down there, and been running the company out of that shop where we have kind of almost like a pro shop. So it's kind of like a gun shop. And
Mm.
then we have an indoor range. We built a classroom where we do a lot of community based instruction there. And then a full on armory in the back where we build all our rifles out.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, um, with your time in law enforcement, let's talk a little bit about kind of some of those struggles in law enforcement
Mhm.
and the things that first responders deal with and how we deal with them. So for you, obviously law enforcement's different than fire, which I was in and still am in, but um, beyond just dealing with the public and the constant watchful eye of everybody having a camera, which adds its whole new level of stress these days. Um, but the traumatic things we see and the things that are hard to deal with, those things that I don't know, I guess you could say keep us awake at night or that are hard that we can't unsee, right? So for you, um, how have you experienced those things and how have you dealt with those things?
Yeah, so I mean, I was really fortunate starting my career in 2007, like right before the recession. So my department was one of the fastest growing areas in the Vegas Valley. So they were flush with cash. They had no problem sending guys to training, doing all that kinds of stuff, and being not having a prior military background coming into law enforcement was a little bit of an eye opener, especially growing up in rural Utah, right, where everything is just so vanilla, and then
Mm.
going down to like Las Vegas, which is the ultimate opposite of that.
Yeah.
But getting in there at the right time where, law enforcement was still relatively in that area, law enforcement was still respected. Um, and there was still enough opportunity to actually be a police officer and actually uphold the law and do that. And we didn't have cameras at the time. So uh, it was, like I said, it was very eye opening for me to go down there, but I kind of had to come to grips with some stuff just right out of the gate of, and I've always kind of had this mindset growing up, but it really just helped with that part of like, hey, you're gonna see some stuff, you might have to do some stuff, and you have to get okay with that very, very early and very, very quickly. One of the first things they did in my police academy is they sit us down. We're all brand new recruits, and they immediately play like a 5-minute video of just officers getting killed, just being murdered on traffic stops or getting shot or whatever, to really shock everybody's conscience, to make sure that everybody's there for the right reasons and they understand and know that what they're getting into, right?
Mm-hmm.
The dangers they're getting into and the things they could possibly see. So I'm grateful for that, being introduced to that very, very early. But again, having kind of already that mindset going into it of like, I'm gonna go home at night. I'm gonna, overcome whatever's put in front of me
Mm-hmm.
to be able to do that and really come to grips. Because ultimately, in like law enforcement, same thing with the military, you have to become okay with taking a life right out of the gate. Not that you go looking for it ever, but you have to be ready for that. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of guys don't have that conversation with themselves, or they do it too late, and they're involved in incidents where lives are lost, whether it's one that they had to take or one that was taken in front of them, and they just don't understand or know how to cope with it. And unfortunately, in our culture, and I know it thrives in the fire culture as well, of, well, if you talk about it, you're weak.
Mm-hmm.
If it's discussed, outside of the quote unquote, debrief at the end of the incident, after that, it's a done issue and nobody talks about it, right? So that really came into grips. I really didn't see. I mean, we saw death in patrol. Obviously, dead bodies. Unfortunately, a couple kids were mixed up in that. So you see that stuff, but you kind of just process it as like, I didn't cause this. This was already, like, I responded to this,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's tragic, and some guys and gals, have issues with that. But for me, that part of it wasn't really that difficult. It wasn't until later when we got into the tactical space where we really started to see that. And then one of the major incidents of October 1st, the Route 90, Harvest Festival down in Las Vegas, the massacre down there. And we can talk about that if you want, and my involvement in that situation. But that's where a lot of that stuff started to kind of change, and I saw myself change. I mean, you already kind of, I don't know how much fire deals with this, but as a cop, you start to change, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
They teach you, oh, put your back to the door and do all this stuff, and I did all that stuff, and I knew it was for a purpose. But you start really seeing society and other human beings in a very negative light. It's, hey, I'm smiling at you, I'm shaking your hand, but I've already killed you 3 times in my mind. That kind of warrior mentality that
Mm-hmm.
was really thrust upon us uh, pre Ferguson era, really. And I kind of divide that up as my law enforcement career in certain areas of things that occurred nationwide. You have pre Ferguson, you have the Obama years, and then you have George Floyd era, and kind of the COVID era, as I kind of divide them up, and really seeing the shift in the culture and the outlook towards law enforcement. And not only do you kind of have this unhealthy view of society to begin with, now all of a sudden you see that culture start to change and almost turn against you, and it makes you even more on guard, and I don't want to use the word irrational, but just you don't see anybody as a friend anymore,
Yep.
and that can be up to and including family members. I had experience, during that George Floyd time where um, I had a family member, not immediate, was an in-law, but they were kind of on the other side of things, and they were kind of supporting the other side of that, and it was very difficult to have to sit down at Sunday family dinners every week and look at this person, because they're looking at me with absolute distaste, even though I've known them for
Yep.
years, and they know who I am and they know what I stand for. And to see them kind of look down on me like that, it really changed a lot of things. So um, again, the biggest thing is not being able to, or not knowing that it was okay to talk. Like, if you had to go see a shrink, there was a problem and there was a chance you were probably going to lose your job and you were going to get shunned. And I think that's really a disservice for a lot of guys, in our type of profession.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly. And I can relate to the back against the wall. Um, I'd spent 5 years as a fire investigator when I worked for the U.S. Forest Service. And so they kind of gave you like some collateral law enforcement duties. It was really, it was kind of hokey because they're like, hey, you have the ability to go do cop stuff, but we're not going to give you the tools. You're a non-sworn officer. Um, and for me, like I always have been the type that I take my job seriously and like I want to be the best at whatever I do. And so if somebody needed a ticket, I'd give them a ticket. And the problem with that was where I worked was that it was very rural and remote, and everybody knew who you were. So instantly, I was a bad guy as soon as a local got a ticket, and uh, that really got me into that back against the wall thing because they did give us some limited training, and a lot of it was just like, you know, kind of head on a swivel, be in defensive stance. You're out in the middle of freaking nowhere. Don't be dumb,
Mhm.
be really careful. And I quickly saw that suddenly I didn't look at anybody as a friend. And just like you said, I mean, word for word, that it was always the who are they? What are they up to? What are they really up to? And like you said, how am I going to kill them? and and what's my escape route? So going out in public, even if I had went out of town and went somewhere for the weekend, I still carried that with me. I didn't know a soul in that place. None of them knew me, but I would be back against the wall, needed that corner booth or that place that I could just see the entrance and exits and see the whole picture wherever I was. And I think that I carried that around for a lot of years after I left that job before I finally was able to just kind of put that at ease. And while it's important programming to have, because your life depends on that when you're doing that job, it makes it very difficult to have a normal life outside of the job.
Yeah, I definitely think like if you let it consume you, I mean, you'd see guys that, and like especially in my academy class, as soon as we got out of the academy, they let policing consume them.
Mhm.
They no longer were, Joe Blow. They were Officer Joe Blow. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And so they took that training and that heightened awareness to almost unhealthy levels.
Mhm.
And if you allow that to occur, you're going to be absolutely miserable. Um, I've been fortunate to be able to find the balance of that to still be prepared and aware of my surroundings because that's what I teach.
Mhm.
Um, but to not let it go to such an unhealthy level of almost paranoia, if you will.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, but I had the same thing, like social anxiety. Even if I was going to a party where I literally knew everybody in the room, I was trying to find an excuse not to go or to get out of it early, which
Yeah.
drives my wife nuts because she's like a social butterfly. So she wants to stay and chat and go to parties and stuff. And I'm just like, no, I'll just sit at home on the couch by myself.
Yep.
And so I still do deal with that to an extent, but uh, it definitely if you allow it to consume you, if you allow it to go to that unhealthy level, it can be disastrous.
Absolutely. And I think it snowballs too, because once we have an experience that we've fallen back on that, then all of a sudden now it's not just, oh, I'm not being paranoid. This is real because of XYZ happened. And so it
Yeah.
just reinforces that. Um, so what are some ways that you've coped with that to still be vigilant but not hyper vigilant?
Uh, understanding the difference. I mean, it's when you do it in like you're in uniform, right? You're a billboard. Everybody knows who you are and what you're doing, right? If you're wearing any type of badge or insignia or whatever, uh, everybody knows who you are, right? And being able to take that and say, okay, if I'm no longer in that role, I can still be aware of my surroundings, but I don't have to think that everybody's in here to hurt me,
Mm,
right? We went through a time in Vegas where we actually had two officers killed while they were eating lunch, like literally just sitting eating lunch, had no former interactions with the suspects, and these suspects were like sovereign citizen out for the world, government, all that stuff, and just walked right into the pizzeria and shot them both. So that really changed law enforcement's outlook to the public for a lot of guys during that time, because literally I remember just days after that occurring, I was on the SWAT team at the time, and we went out to lunch, and literally we had all these booths because it was kind of almost like a bar style restaurant, because we have a lot of those in Vegas.
Mm,
And literally we have all these tables, and not one of us had our back to the door, right? When normally we'd offset the tables and do whatever and just have a conversation, just eat lunch and be done. But that situation changed everybody's mentality. Like, nobody had their back to the door,
mm,
and everybody's like, I remember very specifically this instance where a guy came in and he kind of looked a little shady, but he wasn't overly aggressive. He wasn't eyeballing us at all, but he kind of stepped up into our section. And I'm sure, for firefighters, everybody loves you guys. So it's kind of different for you guys.
yes
But
and no, but
like,
mostly.
yeah, but when you see like a group of cops in a restaurant, like everybody tends to avoid that area of the restaurant, right? They don't want to sit over there. They don't want to do any of that. So the fact that this guy came kind of in our area, immediately started like flags started going up, and then he had a backpack and he starts running through the backpack, and I kid you not, like every single one of us had our hands on our guns and we were ready to just go to work,
Mm,
right? And that's that almost unhealthy level that we took it because of the situation around us. So it's not always the situation doesn't always happen to you. Sometimes it can happen to just our culture or our profession,
mm,
that we take a like a better term, we take offense to that, right? And so
yeah.
we harness that and like, this guy got hurt, he's completely different agency, doesn't I've never even met the guy, but something happened to him, and I'm taking that personally, so I'm now going to look at everyone around me as the enemy.
Mm,
And unfortunately, that is the worst possible thing you can do, because it's very detrimental to your mental health. It kind of goes back to that thing we talked about before. Like, you're looking at everybody like you got a plan to kill them, which you don't need to have, right? So for me, being able to find that balance of, okay, I am no longer in law enforcement, so I no longer have that billboard mentality of, when I walk in, I'm in uniform and everybody knows who I am, and there may be somebody in here that's trying to hurt me. It's more of, okay, there's bad characters in this world that are intent on hurting people, and I'm going to make sure that if they choose where I'm currently at, that I can react to the situation appropriately, and
mm,
and find that balance of still using that training and those tactics, but in a way to where it's more of a guardian mentality rather than a warrior mentality.
yeah.
Now, when it's time to go to work, you go to work, right? But not always being so hyper vigilant that it becomes an issue, because it can seriously mess with your health, your mental state. Because I consider those, they're linked, but they're two separate things, right?
Mm,
So that's kind of how I've done it. And like I said, I kind of hit that threshold very early in my career where I was okay with violence, and I was okay with being involved in violence and administering violence within a certain parameter, right? So for me, it was never an issue. Like, we had guys that they were involved in shootings and they almost left law enforcement because it just messed them up, right?
yeah.
They hadn't had that conversation with themselves. Whereas for me, I'd be driving in my patrol car and we'd pull up to a stoplight. I'm like, okay, uh, I'm not going to stop next to this person's car because of X, Y, and Z. If this person got out and immediately started shooting my car, what would I do? Constantly going through what if scenarios. So I was always mentally sharp and mentally prepared for those situations, and having that conversation with myself. So kind of talking myself through things. And then obviously being surrounded by the right people,
Mm,
right? So you don't have like what my friend went through, where he became the officer, right? And that was his whole that was him. That was
mm,
all he was. Whereas having that balance of people that were outside of law enforcement, and it's a struggle. And I think anybody who says that they don't struggle just a little bit when you're in our type of profession, like when you tend to gravitate to other cops, other firefighters, or people, veterans or whatever,
mm,
because we all have that kind of mentality, and we know that we understand each other. And
yeah.
that's where I think on the being able to share and cope helps more, because like if a cop just goes to somebody who has no idea what law enforcement does and no background whatsoever, that's going to go very poorly for them, because they're not going to be able to understand, they're not going to be able to help that person get through what they need to get through.
Mhm.
Whereas if you have a group of either former law enforcement or whatever that has the ability to talk through those situations and has that background, there's that trust,
Yep.
right? So I don't even know if I answered your question, but there you
Yeah,
go.
no, you did. And I think that's important too, because we do isolate ourselves in kind of
Mhm.
our groups. And that's society as a whole. Like everybody talks about inclusiveness and all these things. Human nature is to surround yourself with the people that are like you and that you're
Like-minded
comfortable.
individuals. Yep.
I mean, like I've met some people who are like used to be criminals and have turned their lives around and they're like
Mhm.
wonderful people now,
Right.
but I don't necessarily relate to them the way that I would relate to things with you or with other firemen or people who have experienced my life experiences. Like I can love them like a brother because they've done incredible things with their lives. They're good people. I know that their past was messy and dark, that
Mhm.
they've fixed that. But I'm not going to relate to them the same as with somebody who's had the shared life experiences that I've
Well, and
had.
I think we talk about brotherhood, if you let it get cheesy, it gets cheesy. But there is that type of bond where it's like, hey, you took an oath of service
Mhm.
to serve something higher than yourself, so that binds you with other individuals that have done that same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's through the roof with veterans. You see that all the time. Law enforcement, firefighters, everything. But I've done the same thing where, in the past 3 years, especially as I've left law enforcement, the more people I meet through other groups and whatnot that have nothing to do with my background, whatever, I'm able to better relate with them now because I've kind
Mhm.
of said, okay, I've got the people I relate with over here, but these people over here, even though they don't share my same experiences, doesn't mean they don't have value
Mhm.
and they can enrich my life with their experiences that they've had. Um, so yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And I think too though, from the same standpoint, like it's important to have the brotherhood and that uniting force that we have amongst first responders. But it's important to deal with our mess because when we leave law enforcement, we leave firefighting or military, we're not around those people anymore. We're still
Right.
friends with them. We're still connected, but we've separated that life. And so it changes. Like I've read some articles about uh, if you're getting ready to leave the emergency services, like the 5 years before you leave, you need to be finding a circle of friends outside
Right.
of that because you're going to be a very lonely, depressed person when you get out if you don't, because you're going to retire and that's great. Everybody's going to celebrate that, and those people are still connected to you, but you're not going to see them every day. You're not having those conversations at shift change. You're not going on the same calls. You're not dealing with the same things anymore. So once you're removed, it makes it very difficult.
Right. 100%. And it, I don't think anybody truly realizes the significance of that until they do actually leave. You have
Mm,
guys that they put in their 20, 30 years in law enforcement, like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna kick back on the porch and swing. It's like, no, you're not.
yeah.
Because if you do, you're going to go absolutely crazy, depending on the person, right? I mean, there's
Mm,
some guys that have been able to successfully be like completely leave law enforcement, that I've seen at least leave law enforcement, and now all they do is like fly fish in Montana, right? And good on them.
yeah.
But a lot of the guys you see, and I'm sure in fire it's the same, is they leave and then they immediately become lost. Like they have a good 6 months of like relaxing time,
Mm,
and then they become lost. They lose their sense of purpose because we had that sense of purpose when we're first responders, right?
mm,
And now that purpose no longer exists, and so they lose themselves, especially the guys that are very heavily invested in whatever it is they were doing, right? If that was
mm,
their whole life and they come out, that's why I honestly think that's why you see combat veterans struggle so much. Like
mm,
if they can't start up a training company or get involved in some types of firearm deal, like they become very lost because they have no connection to anything and they lose
yep.
that brotherhood of, I still know all the guys on the team. I still know a bunch of people at the department. My interactions with them have changed, right? And I don't see them every day. So I kind of lost a little bit about of that. but being able to help, in a healthy manner, create new groups and new friends, like what you were saying.
Mm,
Um, because that was definitely one thing that actually drew me to, in a roundabout way, to the Lions Den.
mm.
Was I don't know if you want to go into that, but
Yeah, that's fine.
uh, so I had just left the team. It was 2019. I was in the, yeah, I had just left the team. It was 2019. And the circumstances of me leaving the team were not by choice.
Mm,
Unfortunately, another guy on the team decided that his career was more important than mine, and he said some stuff, and some supervisors took his word over mine, and it just ended bad. So I won't get into that. But so I ended up leaving the team and going back to patrol, and I had been having a nagging shoulder injury my entire SWAT career, and I just always just kind of fought through it, and is what it is, right? But getting into patrol, and like COVID was just now starting to be a thing. So I was like, you know what? We're gonna take some time away from the streets. I'm gonna get my shoulder fixed because now it's a quality of life issue.
mm,
Um, and get that fixed. So I'm literally riding a desk in the police station taking complaints, right? Because that's where they stick you when you're on light duty. And I was that guy. Like, I was lost. Like, I let SWAT consume me,
mm,
and what I did on the team. And so to not have that group around me anymore, I felt very quickly like I've got to find a new tribe, right? I've got
mm,
to find guys that are like-minded with that, and actually started following Ryan Mickler with the Order of Man,
mm.
and kind of got into that and gotten into his group. And unfortunately, when I was in there, it was a little too kumbaya for my taste. A lot of great people in there, met some cool guys, lots of law enforcement in there as well, but it wasn't what I needed at the time, right?
Yeah.
So I'm listening to his podcast one day, and Sean Whalen pops on. And initially, I was like, "Who is this guy? Like, he's the most crass, intrusive. Like, who? Like, I'm not. Yeah." So turned it off. And then he actually went back on his show a little bit later. I listened to the second one. I was like, you know what? I actually kind of jive with some of the stuff he's saying. Like, it makes sense, and I'm kind of okay with it, And go back and listen to the other one, and no, I kind of jive with this guy. Oh, he's got his own group, and they all kind of think the same way.
Mm.
Interesting. So I actually started looking into the Lions Den, and that was back when he had it open like all the time.
Yeah.
Um, and so I was looking at it, but I was that guy who was like, oh, well, it's an extra expense every month, and is it really worth it? Blah blah blah. And so I didn't sign up, and that's when he closed it for the first time. And I was like, oh, I missed my chance, right? So then a couple of months go by and he reopens it. So I immediately join. And from then on, it was just meeting tons of people that had nothing to do with my background necessarily. I up until this last year, and I think you were actually at that fly-in, where I actually for the first time met another cop that was part of the Lions Den.
Mm,
Because it was just everybody else. It was entrepreneurs, and I felt like I connected with that because I was trying to be an entrepreneur, and seeing those guys. Like I was at one of the fly-ins with Ryan Bowman, and
mm.
like what you're talking about. The dude was a drug dealer back in the day. Like
Yeah.
he would have been like this, right? But now he's sitting here and he's teaching about business and his experiences, and it's like, yeah, certain people can turn their lives around and do the right, do good, and I can be friends with them.
Yeah.
I can, associate with them and learn from them. So uh, I found that tribe, right? Found that group of individuals and a few individuals that I'm very well connected with now. Uh, and it's just it's helped me to be able to turn that corner finally of, like I said before, like I still teach and train law enforcement and heavily involved in law enforcement community, and I'm grateful for those friendships and those relationships, but now I have this other group that's not over here that helps balance who I am.
Yeah. And that's huge. When I joined the Dan almost a year ago, I was kind of in that lost phase, had just been divorced. I really, well, I love all my coworkers. They're great, great people. I just didn't relate. Like my life experiences were so much more where, I went from being a career firefighter to a business owner back to this job where I'm a firefighter, but I'm a public works employee running water and sewer systems and all this. So fire is just a little part of it. So I can relate to them on that. And there's some common ground there, but they don't really understand me from the stance of like all that I've done and experienced, which is fine. But I knew like after the divorce, like I just didn't, there was a certain direction I knew I didn't want to go. And having spent so much time and years working on PTSD and recovery and treatments and coming out of dark places and like not drowning myself in alcohol every day and doing what I needed to do in life instead of the things that were killing me. Um, Finding the den, I was just kind of like, yeah, I mean, it resonates. Sean resonates with me. I'm like, yeah, he's kind of a pompous asshole, like, but I love the guy. I really do. And he is such a mentor because of his life experiences and his true desire to actually help people. Once you get past the ego and all those things that are Sean, it's very easy to see that, like, no, there's a real human under here that actually is a uniter for the
And
people that,
legitimate cares about other people
yeah,
and their
and
success.
and it's awesome. And within that instantly found connection in that group, I mean, that is like such a good tribe. And that fly-in where we met, that was incredible because there was so many first responders, law enforcement type people in there. And excuse me, but to build those connections and see that there's people who have similar life experiences or on a similar trajectory in life and seeking to do things, that's really, I think, what is key when we're looking for that tribe outside of that work tribe. To the point where my friends and the people I associate with are all in the lion's den, like, which is kind of weird because there's not really any of them near me.
Right.
Um, so like I don't really hang out with anybody here where I live, but I go down to Draper and Salt Lake area and down there and hang out with people that I know that are part of that group because we all relate, and it's an awesome thing. I've enjoyed it and really appreciate like meeting people like you and different people that have the story and are willing to share their story. That's one of the things that struck me is everybody's willing to share their story because they know there's not only growth for themselves, but there's growth for others by sharing their story. And that's why so many people that come on this podcast end up being from the Lion's Den because they've all accepted that those hard things that we don't want to talk about, yeah, we're going to talk about them,
You got to talk about them. Yep.
which
Yeah.
is great. Um, so do you want to talk a little bit about the um, harvest?
October
Um,
1st. Yeah.
yeah.
Uh, so that was a very interesting night. So we have a dynamic in the Las Vegas Valley where all the agencies. So you have the city of Las Vegas, you have the city of Henderson, and the city of North Las Vegas, and we all have our own SWAT teams.
Mm,
And we all train together. We're very cohesive. Like we help each other on calls. Like if there's massive incidents or whatever, or if they need extra bodies for search warrants or whatever. So we all know each other. We're all kind of like on the same page, basically.
mm,
Uh, but that also means that the typical political BS that tends to trickle into that type of community.
mm,
So at the time, our SWAT team had a female commander, and she was the first female SWAT lieutenant in the Valley. So immediately she was being almost ostracized by the other admins from the other teams because oh she's a female, she doesn't know what she's doing, and that stuff trickled down to the team.
mm,
So there was a weird political dynamic going on at the time, and Las Vegas Metro had just received a new commander literally a week before this occurred. So hey, welcome to the show, man. You're about to deal with the biggest mass murder in U.S. history. Go forth, you know. But so we were. I remember I was at home. I was working on some Cerakote stuff. I was actually Cerakoting some Glock slides for the business, and phone started going off, and the TV, switched over. I can't remember what show I was even watching, but it clicked over saying, there's active shooters down on the strip, multiple casinos. basically the world's coming to an end. And,
Mm.
in law enforcement, when we talk about active shooters and whatever, and mass casualty events, we start looking at different case studies from history, and one of the incidents in Mumbai was probably the most recent at that current time. And so everybody's thinking this is like a Mumbai style attack where you have multiple assailants attacking multiple areas, causing as much confusion to try to spread law enforcement out and really,
Mm.
wreak havoc. So that was all going on. Las Vegas Metro immediately gets activated because that's their jurisdiction, obviously. But then they start activating all the other teams in the surrounding areas. So it was a good maybe 10 minutes of receiving phone calls and text messages from other guys like, "Hey, where are you guys at? Are you coming?" Um, which at the time was super frustrating, and later uh, was a bit of a part of the messed up part for me of not being able to just go right away, right? We train for this, and then all of a sudden we're on the sidelines because somebody has a beef with my lieutenant.
Mm.
And that became a very frustrating point, which I'll get to in a little bit. But anyway, so we finally get activated, and it was one of those really eerie times. Like my, I was a police officer for probably about a year and a half before I met my wife.
Mm.
So she didn't have the before, like she came into the life, right?
Mm.
And she was always very supportive and knew and understood. We were always on the same page of what goes on at work and trying not to bring it home, and just coping with certain things. And she would often joke, she's like, I people would ask her like, well, aren't you worried about him being on the SWAT team and da da da? And she'd say, no, I prefer him to be on the SWAT team because at least he's got 12 other dudes that have his back 100%, and they've all trained, and they're all highly trained individuals, and they're going to get through it, as opposed
Mm.
to being on patrol and you might be the only guy there.
Mm.
So she was always really good with it. But that particular night, you kind of get that gut feeling that just something like this one's different,
Mm.
right? And just the initial intelligence that was coming on over the radio, uh, which later turned out to be false, but it was like, hey, I had to go to her, and usually I, like just give her a kiss on the cheek and run out the door and go save the world. But this time it was took a little extra time, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And I remember telling her like, hey, I might not come back from this one. And to see that look in her eyes change of like, holy crap, he's never said that before.
Yeah.
Like, this one's different, this one's serious, right? So hop in the car and start racing towards the strip and trying to come up with how we were going to approach this, and have multiple teams basically just roving down. And it was comical because I used to be a big video gamer, um, and there was a video game. It was one of the SEAL Team 6 video games from
Mm.
Tom Clancy, and one of them was based around the Las Vegas Strip and terrorists taking over the strip. And I'm like, holy crap, I'm living a video game right now, right? We're just gonna literally just go from one end of the strip to the other, and we're just gonna fight terrorists. It's like I was scared and nervous and excited all at the same time, right? Because you train for these types of things, but at the same time, it's like this isn't just some two-bit crackhead that's holed up in a house.
Yeah.
This is a cord. What we knew at the time, this is like a coordinated deal. So this is about to get real. Um, Probably one of the eeriest experiences pulling up on the strip, because if you've ever been to the strip and you know how busy it is
Yeah.
24/7, like that doesn't stop.
Yeah.
And roll up on the strip and just have mass chaos, people running, cars driving all over the place, and just very, very surreal experience coming into that situation. By the time we arrived, or our team was activated and arrived there, um, they were already dealing with the individual in the hotel. They had narrowed it down to, okay, this isn't necessarily a massive. Well, they still didn't know. They felt like they kind of had it centralized, but they weren't entirely sure. So it was
Mm.
just getting ready, and where we showed up, where we staged was literally right down from the venue. So you had tons of people coming down the street, yelling, screaming, people grabbing onto you, because they see law enforcement. They're like, hey, I need to, if I'm with this person, I'm safe.
Mm.
And the the mental shock of having to, shake those people off and say, hey, just keep going that way. Danger's this way, go that way, right?
Mm.
And to see that uncertainty in the people's faces of, but I'm here with you, I'm safe here. And to have to tell them, no, I can't stay with you. You can't stay with me. You got to go.
Yeah.
Uh, and keep walking towards, keep running towards that threat area. But when we finally got all grouped up, we had determined, okay, it's a single individual in a hotel room that's literally just spraying this venue from a high rise. So most people that aren't familiar with the situation, this individual, he was a local. He had a house in Mesquite, which is about 45 minutes outside Las Vegas, but he was a constant gambler. Like he was almost like a professional gambler, I
Mm.
guess. And he would stay at all the local hotels. And the way the hotels work, if you spend a lot of money there and you're a big winner and you do all this stuff, they give you comps and all kinds of stuff. So he had chosen. We found out later that he had actually scoped out multiple different venues before and chose not to carry out his plan on those other venues, and he just chose that particular venue on that night. But there's actually on top of the Mandalay Bay, there's actually a Four Seasons hotel. So you have the Mandalay Bay that's at the bottom, and then the
Mm.
top couple floors are the Four Seasons. And he was a comped member of the Four Seasons, and he had, because of the lack, I don't want to call it lack of security, but when you get to that certain level of VIP casinos,
Mm.
pretty much get to do whatever you want. So literally, he was able to truck up just suitcases full of guns, and nobody thought anything different because this guy was a regular, right?
Yeah.
So he get all that stuff. He set himself up and he just started. The way the hotel sits, it's literally just like a dirt lot across the street where they would hold concerts all the time.
Mm.
Uh, and he, waited to the last set and just started spraying, right? And it's kind of comical. There's a lot of conspiracy theories and stuff that pop out about that venue. I mean, there was some crazy ones. At one point, there was a Saudi prince involved,
Yeah.
and it kidnapped. Like it just got weird for a while. Like people let their minds race. But um, solo actor, uh, Las Vegas Metro did a phenomenal job. Hats off to those guys. They really took the fight to him. Got to the room, and he eventually ended up killing himself, knowing that he was about to go, toe to toe with us. So he goes down. So now it just becomes like a containment situation, right? So we realize, hey, the entire Mandalay Bay has to be cleared, which is a very, very. I mean, you're talking thousands of rooms,
Yes.
and the reason why they had so many reports that this was a multiple attack scenario was individuals were getting hit inside the venue, fleeing the venue, and then they were collapsing in the other casinos.
Okay.
So you had people running across the street because all these casinos are stacked like right on top of each other as you
Mm.
go down the strip. So they were running into these other venues like the MGM and New York, New York, and they're dropping in these casinos. So people are thinking that there's situations going on in these other casinos. So now those have to be cleared and taken care of.
Mm.
So I mean, even though we've got, close to 100 SWAT guys in Las Vegas, not even including the FBI team, to be able to clear, you know, at least within that vicinity of those hotels was like, okay, this is going to be a very
That's an incredible amount of rooms. I knew that Mandalay Bay had to be cleared, but that building, I didn't know the other ones too.
So we didn't have to
That's
do
incredible.
we didn't have to do the extent in the other ones.
Mm.
Once we were able to determine that it was one location that the shots were being fired from, and that these people were just collapsing in there. We didn't have to fully do all those casinos, but we still had to set up this huge perimeter, right?
Mm.
And where the Mandalay Bay, like it's right across from the McCarran Airport, so like that all had to be locked down and secured, and it just became a very overwhelming uh, task. So like hats
Mm.
off to all the supervisors that were down there that were making the best calls they knew how to make and how they made them. But that's where we kind of took on like a support role of, okay, now we're just going to lock this thing down and make sure that we don't have any of these secondary attacks. Like there's not, you know, an IED in a car somewhere that's now going to get clacked off and do all that
Mm.
kind of stuff. So that's where things really kind of took a dark turn, if you will, especially for me, because now we got tasked. So basically, Las Vegas Metro was completely tied up with the hotel. You have Henderson, you have North Las Vegas, and it was almost like a pissing match of, okay, who's going to sit and babysit and who's going to go out and find more trouble,
Mm.
right? And they were able to determine very quickly this individual had a house in Mesquite, so there became a plan to go and serve a search warrant on this guy's house. So then it became a pissing match between Henderson and North Las Vegas, like who's going? Because literally we're just gonna like jump in trucks and just roll up the I-15 in armored vehicles and go hit this guy's house. And at the time, they said, okay, we're going to send North Las Vegas to go do the search warrant on the house. Henderson's going to stay um, and basically create scene security. And that was a huge hit to our team's, I don't call it ego, but like we took offense to that.
Mm.
It's like, no, like there's going to be trouble over there, and we want to be part of it, right?
Yeah.
Uh, Later, after years of talking to people and actually talking to supervisors that were there that are no longer in those positions and can talk about what happened, because we initially thought it was just a continuation of, oh, they just don't like our female lieutenant, so we're getting
Mm.
shafted.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until later that we actually found out that it was kind of cool. Was they're like, no, we're gonna send nothing against North Las Vegas guys. They're a tremendous group of guys, but they sent them because they trusted us more with the scene security and the possibilities of there being follow-on attacks, right?
Mm.
So we literally had to set up this huge perimeter around the Mandalay Bay and the venue itself, and that's probably the what happened over the course of that night, because then the FBI gets flown in and they start kind of doing their thing, and you start seeing uh, bodies being removed and people trying to break into the perimeter because like, hey, we scattered, but my friend's still in there, or we don't know where our friends are at or our family's at. Phones are, cell phones are dying, so people can't get a hold of each other because I won't get into that because it's a security issue. But that was probably where things really got eerie for me. That things that still kind of, I don't want to say haunt me still, but like get brought up
Mm.
when I'm having those moments is how quiet the strip got. And for the people that have been in the strip and realize how it is a 24/7 circus,
Yeah.
it was dead silent. But what you did hear was the cell phones inside the venue of the people that were dead. So all night you were hearing random cell phones going off, knowing that a friend or a family member is trying to call and that phone's not getting answered, right?
Wow.
Um, so every once in a while that'll pop up. Like I'll have a dream about it or something where cell phones are going off. Um, so there's a little bit of it there. And then for the next 3 days, literally we did 12 on, 12 off, and we were seeing security for like the next 3 days straight. Wait for the FBI to come do their thing, and then of course the the politicians doing their dog and pony crap that they do, um, coming to see the scene, and it's like, get out of here, and you
Yeah.
start getting pissed off and angry. President Trump showed up. That was actually a cool experience because he was very pro law enforcement. And after going through 8 years of anti law enforcement, Obama and Ferguson, and how that completely changed policing in the United States, it was very refreshing to see, Trump come in and want to shake hands with guys and meet with people and make sure that everybody was doing okay in that regard. That was
Mm.
actually a pretty cool experience. To be able to get to meet him. But yeah, that was just 3 days of absolute chaos and on again, off again kind of thing that really affected our team moving forward. Of how are we not going to allow this to happen again, right?
Mm.
Because the biggest thing that we see with these mass shootings or whatever is where the copycat's going to come out, right?
Yep.
When you're the entertainment capital of the world, now all of a sudden everybody in the valley is like, okay, now we're going to secure every single venue. Well, if everybody knew how many events actually go on in Las Vegas on a daily basis,
Yeah.
so they were literally stretching everybody so thin and running the shifts so that like everybody was just getting so dog tired, worn out, whatever. And it actually took a few months after the fact to kind of get everybody back into a normal set routine.
Mm.
But then after that is when you start to see, guys starting to struggle with stuff because we didn't have to assist with body removal. But again, that was something that like we were watching the whole time, right?
Yeah.
Is evidence being collected, seeing, bloody clothing because they like a windstorm came through one day and started stirring up everything in that place. And like I said, it's just a big open dirt lot, right?
Mm.
So now you've got, bloody clothes flying all over the place. It was just it was the closest thing to a combat zone that I had ever seen or
Mm.
been experienced in. And yeah, and to be involved in that and to see how it was turned into a political thing and certain people taking, liberties with voicing their opinions on that, you get very angry because you're like,
Mm.
that's not what happened. That's not what this is. Like, stop trying to politicize this. And you start to kind of hold all that in.
Yep.
So you've seen what you've seen and you've heard what you heard, and you're trying to deal and move and cope with that stuff. And at the same time, all these outside influences are telling you how you should have done it different and all that kind of stuff. And it just got very, very angry. And that's kind of what ultimately led me to leave law enforcement. Was I was finding that I was angry all the time. And that's a very common thing with first responders and veterans is they're just pissed off all the time, like for
Yep.
no reason whatsoever. Like your
Yeah.
day could be going stellar and you're just pissed off. You
Hmm.
hate the world. You hate like anybody says anything to you. It's like, fuck off. I don't want to
Yep.
talk to you. I don't want to be around anybody. Like just leave me alone. Right. And luckily, I was able to recognize that very early and start to process that. I never, we had to do the typical, department, hey, go see the department shrink and
Mm.
talk about it kind of a deal, which we all did. But again, I think for me, having those conversations very early in my career helped me cope with that better or maybe faster than some other guys did. I know there's some other guys that are still struggling with some stuff, and there was a couple other calls that we were involved in over the years where, like mass killing events where ex-husband is pissed off at ex-wife, so literally goes to ex-wife's new house with new family and murders everybody, right? And we have to respond to that, and we're literally pulling these kids with bullet holes in them out of this house that he tried to light on fire and just stuff like that, stuff you see in law enforcement that no one is ever going to see except those first responders,
Yep.
right? And maybe the people that were immediately involved in those. Um, so, and that's actually one kind of a segue of understanding other people's PTSD better.
Hmm.
Because when you're involved in as a first responder, at least the way I look at it is like, well, the things that I see are not the things that you see. So you can't possibly have PTSD because you live this vanilla life and you've
Mm.
never had to be anything. What I came to know and understand was that stuff can manifest in so many different ways. And it all stems from some type of trauma, whether it was trauma dealt with in early years that resurface, or a traumatic event that may not be traumatic in my eyes, but was
Mm.
traumatic for the person. And they start to use that. And it took me a while to kind of become sympathetic to it, if you
Mm.
will, of like, you don't have PTSD. Like, okay, so you got robbed at the gas pump. Like, but did you die? Right?
Yeah.
Mentality of like, I've been shot at. All right. So no, your PTSD is not the same as mine, and that's not the case. Like the
Mm.
brain and how the body deals with that coping mechanism and the PTSD is for the most part the same with everybody. It's just what triggers that is what's different for everybody. So
Mm.
that's ultimately how I came to cope. But there's like I said, there's still times where um, I'll go like a day or two where I'm just pissed off at the world for no reason whatsoever. And when I'm in those dark times, like I literally have a flag in my office that says darkness is one hell of a teacher or a hell of a coach. Um, I kind of took that on as a mantra of being able to use those dark times that I've been through. And when I find myself, having those bad days where I'm just pissed off and I want to be left alone, and I'm kind of like just in my own thoughts of like if things in the business aren't going the right way, or maybe something at the house isn't going the way I needed to go, and I start getting really negative and I start going into those dark places, and that's when all those thoughts start creeping in of like, hey, that one time, that one call, you could have done this and you could have saved this one person, but you didn't. Or had we responded to October 1st faster, maybe we could have saved more people. Like you start having all these thoughts like come into your head, and you have to stop and analyze those and say, okay, what happened to happen. Like there's no
Mhm.
going back. There's nothing
Yep,
you can do that's going to change that. How you move forward is what's going to change that for you.
absolutely.
So, yeah.
And I think a lot of it too is a we have to make that choice to move
Mhm.
forward and to accept the things that we've dealt with. I know for me, it was a struggle for a lot of years to actually look at those things in a way that didn't have some sort of negative context to them. And while some of them just plain old sucked, there's nothing you could do to change it. And accepting that and being at peace with that is a choice. It's not always an easy choice, and it takes work to get to that spot where you make that choice. But ultimately, when I reflect on those things, I have to recognize that I chose to serve and take that job.
Mhm.
So I can't place blame on anyone for it. Because when we get to those dark spots, and especially when you're still in it and you're just burned out and you're like got zero compassion for anybody,
Mhm.
like the call goes out and you're like just instantly like, man, fuck this person for ruining my day. And you don't even know their situation at that point, you
Yeah.
know? But I've been there. And to be in that space, you have to really step back and realize you chose to do this job. You accepted that you were going to see really hard things and deal with really hard things. But ultimately, you have to be at peace with that. You have to accept that certain outcomes, it doesn't matter what you did or what you could have done, the outcome is the outcome. You can't go back and change it. And likely, even if you had done something different, it would still be the same outcome. Um, and I think as we as we come to recognize that, that brings us peace. We still do definitely fall back, and I have those days where everything sucks and everything's dark, and um, ultimately, I have to remind myself that it's okay that those things happened. It's part of me. It's with me, and and I can be at peace with it.
Yeah. And I think you nailed it. Of first off, wanting, recognize that there's a problem, like especially if you have unhealthy coping mechanisms like the alcohol or the drugs or prescription meds. We had guys on our team that they got injured and got hooked on prescription meds, and it
Mm,
it destroyed their careers, right? Of recognizing, hey, I've got an issue and I want to deal with it, right?
mhm,
I'm not going to keep suppressing it with however I choose to suppress it, whether it's alcohol or drugs, or just straight up suppressing it and trying to bottle it up and box it up and never think about it, because eventually that box is going to get opened,
yep.
and you may or may not be ready for it,
And
right?
it's had time to fester.
Yeah.
If you're
And
keeping it
that's
shut, that monster's growing in there.
right. And that's kind of what my experience was. Like I was never a drinker. So like the whole alcohol and thing like that never appealed to me to begin with. So like I didn't have that as a coping mechanism, but I had the boxed up and just put it away mentality of it.
Mm,
And there's days where that box gets opened. And it's like, okay, let's deal with it, and having that mindset of like, okay, I understand and know what happened. And I know and understand what I need to do to get past it. I'm going to take that step to get past it. So and how quickly you can get to that point, right? Of okay, I'm recognizing what's going on, and this is what I'm going to do to change the situation. Where you go for a run, you go do a workout, you go call a buddy, whatever it is, you go and you get to that quickly
mm,
to move past that, right? And knowing that it's always going to be there, like what you said, it's a part of you. It's never going to go away, but how you let it affect you is what's going to keep you from either growing staying stagnant or going the other direction.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important to grow from it. A lot of time, a long time that I spent really looking at it as like this is just like this darkness that's consuming me. It's always going to be here. It's always going to like it's never going to get better. That's how I felt for a long time. Now I can actually look back on it and like I'm thankful for those experiences. Um, there's days where they still suck, like I said, but I'm thankful for them because I know that it helped to mold me and shape me into this better version of myself that I'm able to actually be comfortable with them enough to want to help people who are going through those things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in our lives everything happens for a reason, even the shit show.
Right.
But it's all what we do with it, and as we recognize the good in it, which is it's hard to see that in tragedy there is good.
Mm-hmm.
And it might just be the littlest thing, but being able to find that and recognizing that and seeing that puts a completely different perspective on everything.
Right. Yeah. And I think finding people, either a person or a group of people that can understand what that is and what you're going through. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, from the mental health side of it, mental health professionals or even, other first responders, because sometimes we're our own worst enemy,
Yep.
right? Sometimes we don't do ourselves any favors when we come together as a collective.
Mm,
But finding those individuals that are willing to just sit and listen. Like, hey, I need to unload some stuff and I just need you to listen to me and
mm,
have enough uh, empathy to just sit and take that burden temporarily from
yeah.
somebody. I think that's the biggest thing, and I think that's ultimately what a lot of folks don't get, that then drives them down those other unhealthy pathways and ultimately to the one that is completely irreversible, which is suicide.
Mm,
Uh, they don't find that person soon enough that's willing to let them unload that burden,
mm,
even if it's just temporarily.
yep.
I think that's why it's so important, and I didn't really recognize that, because I never wanted to be that, like that. I don't need your sympathy. I don't need you to like console me for what I've seen and what I've done.
Mm,
Uh, but to be able to be that person that has seen and done those things, to be able to quickly recognize someone else who's going through that same thing I went through and be there to just listen.
mm,
Uh, Really cool experience at one of the fly-ins where a guy was getting out of it or thinking about getting out of career and he didn't know what to do, and it was literally just, hey, talk your way through it, man. Let's talk your way through it. We'll figure something out, and you can either take the ball and run with it, or find something else, or just be that individual that has that background to be able to say, "Hey, I am one of those individuals you can trust to unload that burden."
mm,
It doesn't necessarily have to be from trauma. It can be from, like, when you're getting out of law enforcement. If you've been into it in any significant amount of time, I mean, leaving any career, like, there's stress there
yeah.
of, this is a guaranteed government paycheck every 2 weeks,
Yep.
and I'm stepping off into something unknown, and that's scary. And especially on the law, I'm constantly reverting back to the law enforcement side because obviously that's my experience. But when you've been the individual of that rock of calm and control, and everything's going to be okay because I'm here, and now
Mm,
you have to step out into that unknown where you're no longer in control. It's very, very scary, and I think a lot of guys struggle with that as well when they're getting out of their law
absolutely.
enforcement careers, of not only dealing with the trauma side but also dealing with the unknown of, what do I do now? Like,
Yep.
I'm just a cop, what do I do now, um, and also kind of like where dealing with the trauma, where you've been. I often, one of the things that kind of helped me, that I often rescue, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Open Range, Kevin Costner and
Mm,
Robert Duvall. At the end of the big gun battle, right, they're trying to convince Kevin Costner to kind of stay and be the new law enforcement guy in town, and he's like, there's not a single corner of this town that's not going to have a bad memory for me.
mm,
If you take that concept and that idea and connect everything to it, you're never going to move forward. You're never going to grow. And ultimately, obviously, in the movie, it turns out okay. But you have to take that time of like, okay, yeah, there's times where I drive around my city and I'm like, oh, and, it's almost become like a joke now of
Mhm.
like, yeah, we killed a guy on that corner, or oh yeah, we raided that house, and oh, we did that over here. As you're driving through the thing, that there's not anywhere that doesn't have a memory,
Yes.
whether good, bad, or otherwise, and being able to quickly, like I said, move past it quickly of like where it becomes almost a lighthearted joke,
Mhm.
or to say, okay, yeah, that corner has a really bad memory for me. However, I have all these other good experiences in this area, or I have people that are surrounding me that are going to help me through, so that doesn't become a hindrance to my health.
Yep. And that's huge. I've heard that time and time again about when we live in or near the community that we work,
Mm.
that even just the drive home, there isn't peace for a lot of people, but it is important that you find those things that are comforting in that yeah, that bad thing happened, but this good thing also happened. Because we do carry those stories around in our thoughts, and it's important that we control that we know that we control the dialogue, we control the feeling, the thought that it's there, it happened, but there was this other thing that's there and happened too, and it was good.
Mm.
That not everything is dark, not everything is bad. That's huge. Um, so how can people find you if they wanted to get in touch with you or get to know more about what you do now?
Yeah, so I got my own personal pages both on Facebook and Instagram. Facebook is Josh Nilson. Instagram is Sierra 1702. That was my call sign when I was a sniper on the SWAT team, was Sierra One. So it's Sierra 1702. And then on the company side for Dark Horse Tactical, it's literally just Dark Horse Tactical LLC on Instagram and Facebook. And yeah, we're doing a lot of cool stuff. Of that was, being stayed connected with the law enforcement community, and building rifles, and getting government contracts and whatever was a big deal, but also being able to then turn that focus to the what we call the civilian community, and being able to make sure that people are prepared, trained and prepared. So when they come in contact with these traumatic events, they're at least mentally prepared for them, or
Mm,
have thought through these things beforehand, to where they maybe don't have such a negative impact on their life moving forward. And that's with firearms training, that's with mindset things. We're kind of regaining, not regaining, but revamping our training to really focus on a lot of mindset and preparedness, and really moving that forward so people are mentally prepared with what's coming, because obviously the world's not getting any friendlier,
yeah,
right? um, so really focusing on that, and helping prepare people to face what's coming.
nice.
So
Yep, I think it's great stuff that you're doing, and yeah. What would you final thoughts for you, Josh? What would you say to anybody who's struggling with PTSD or other mental health issues that is maybe on the fence or just isn't sure where to go?
yeah, the probably the biggest one is knowing that you need to talk about it. You need to confront it, because if you continue to suppress it with outside stimulus, or internal, boxing it up and shoving it on a shelf somewhere, eventually that's going to come back, and that monster is going to come out from underneath that bed, and you may or may not be ready for what that fight's going to be. But being able to find an individual that's willing to talk about that, um, that's probably the biggest thing that also helped me, was finding like-minded individuals that would just sit and listen. um, so there's obviously, all the I hate calling them cliche, but all the cliche hotlines that they have for people. Like, there are seriously people on the other side of those phones that truly care about
Mm,
you. They may not know you personally, but they're there to make sure that you get through this particular rough patch that you're going through. So just knowing that there's always going to be someone there uh, to talk to, and listen to what you need to unload. So I kind of took on that as I left law enforcement, going through, that the Order of Man group, and in the Lions Den,
mm,
it's happened a couple times of like, hey, I am one of those guys that this is my background and this is what I've seen and done. If you have something similar and you just want to talk, hit me up and let's talk. I had a really great experience with that when I was part of the Order Man group, where an officer was dealing with some stuff, and he reached out to me and we literally just sat on the phone and talked for like 3 hours,
Mm,
and just having somebody there that's willing to listen, right? And if you happen to be that person that person approaches, just listen. Don't try to fix the problem. Just let them unload what they need to unload, and just be there. Just hold space,
yep,
hold space for them.
yep. Awesome, Josh. Can't thank you enough for your service and for coming on and talking today. If anybody is in a situation, law enforcement or otherwise, feel like Josh is somebody that you'd want to talk to, reach out to him. Same goes for me. If you need to talk, reach out. Um, Appreciate you guys joining in today. And please remember to like, follow, and share this podcast. Give it a 5-star review so that it shows up better on the searches. And the more people that hear this stuff, the more people that can be helped. So have a great week, everybody. Love you all. God bless.